Morning, afternoon, everyone. Those of you who are not aware of who PCCW Global is, we are the international arm of Hong Kong Telecom, the Hong Kong Telco. I don't have any slides about PCCW Global because what I'm going to talk about is about our experience in supply chain management in the telco sector and how we're using blockchain, which is a keyword everyone wants to hear about, in order to develop an automation platform for supply chain management on the wholesale sector. Previously known as OSS/BSS, but OSS/BSS was very much single carrier orientated. So multi-domain data services, this is the topic here. And I'm going to talk about CSPs, communication service providers, not about telcos anymore, because CSPs handle data. They move data through space, they move data through time, and they manipulate data. And those are called transport, compute, and storage. And each and every CSP, which means telcos and cloud providers and mobile operators, move data or manipulate data or store data. We all handle data. Some of it is traditional, some of it is new, some of it is location-based, some of it is cloud-based. So this is what we all do. What are the assets of a CSP? And it doesn't really matter if you're a cloud operator or a mobile operator or a traditional telco or a cable operator. You have your physical assets, you have your nodes, which would mean your endpoints, the unis, which could be enterprise offices, government offices, domestic houses, telehouses, data centers. You have switching and routing devices between all those, between the POPs or data centers or telehouses. You have compute services like virtual machines here and there, either at the edge or at the core. You have storage devices in data centers primarily. You have connectivity between all those nodes and all those elements. Node to node, node to ENI, ENI to ENI, ENI for those not unfamiliar. External network-to-network interface, that means the connection between two different networks. Could be a network which could be a data center or two different carriers or two different clouds. And then we have the partner relationship assets, which are not physical. Those are relations built on top of physical assets. So the first one is actually sort of physical. The ENI itself is physical. We do have a fiber connecting two physical devices belonging to two different networks, which act as the ENI. So it is physical, but the really important thing is not the physical connection, it is the relations built on top of it, the commercial relations, the agreements, the consortia privileges, all sort of agreements that lie on top of the physical connection between two networks through which we do business. And then we have the customer relationship assets, which means our relations with existing customers, which could add to stickiness, existing services, sometimes even exclusive coverage, not exclusive because of regulation, just because we are the only guys who bothered to pull a fiber to a certain location and no one else has a fiber there, so yeah, we're exclusive. So these are the assets of us, CSPs, and again, those CSPs could be cloud operators or anything else. And the real landscape, of course, is a sort of a partial mesh of connectivity between different CSPs, each with their own assets. And PCCW Global is just one of those. And for some, their world is primarily internal. For others, it's primarily external. For us, for some, like PCCW Global, for example, about 50% of our business is internal, which means on our own network, and 50% of our business is actually external, which means it does not start or end on our network. It traverses through other networks, and this is where we come to supply chain management and the need to be able to orchestrate services. Now, Ari from Network did actually a fantastic presentation, I think, where we explained the problem of multi-domain when it comes to connectivity, and not only connectivity. How do we actually manage and orchestrate services across multiple domains? So, product statement. If you know this slide comes from MEF. MEF has defined the LSO reference architecture, which talks about a supply chain management of telcos, and it breaks down the service provider domain into the BSS layer, the OSS layer, NMS layer and EMS layer, but that's not the key here. The key here, it's multiple domains. And the thing is, we have to run a life cycle of a service on top of that infrastructure, which means we have to go through inquiry, quote, ordering, delivery, maintenance, billing across multiple domains. And we have to make sure that there is some sort of value coming out of it. And it's actually a bit more complex because the reality is that we actually have to run this life cycle across in each and every domain on this supply chain, which makes it even more complex. And if you do not speak one single language and one single information model, Ari mentioned data model, I'm actually excited to be in an information model, then we're in trouble because it's going to be very difficult to maintain that. And that is these are the vicious circles I'm going to talk about, because we do see a few vicious circles. Vicious circle number one. When it comes to inter-carrier services, not things in our own network. In our own network, as Ari mentioned, many of us have already created some level of automation, of zero-touch automation on our own network. But when it comes to carrier-to-carrier operations, it's still cumbersome and manual. It leads to slow reaction and to customer needs, and we need to automate that. But to automate, we need specs, because if there are no specs, automation doesn't really work across domains. It only works internally. So, spec development is too slow. So let's kick off an open source project, because open source is fast, right? So now we draw resources from the spec generating entities, and we kick off an open source project. And I'm talking about, from a perspective of a person who has been at the board of MEF and has contributed to various open source consortia as well. Yeah, so now suddenly we see everyone disappearing from the standard body and going to an open source project. And now an open source project is developing something. It yields, because open source, with all due respect, generates great solutions to a very specific problem. And it creates a proprietary solution and not an industry-wide solution. So we get into operational silos, very automated, but still silos, and still proprietary. And we end up with a vicious circle that, once again, we need to start over again. There's another vicious circle here, which is proprietary operations across platforms lead to manual processes. Compatibility, interoperability, can be achieved through adhering to a spec, right? But spec development requires developers and consent. Developers on one side are busy building open source silos, and spec development is slow, so we use proprietary solutions, and we're back to stage one. So two vicious circles generate a vicious bicycle. So open source projects go through initiation, numerous sprints, until we come up with something. Spec development starts with the initiation, development of first spec, first call for comment, second draft, second call for comment, and vice versa. And we end up with about 30 months before we have something really useful coming out of an open source project, and about 30 months when we come up to something really useful from a spec development. So come the specathon, which is a mix of both. Standard development meets quarterly, has weekly calls, writes specs, spends, let's say, 30%, sometimes it's even more, on miscellanea, which is not really spec development. Yeah, you have an opening plenary, a closing plenary, board elections, cocktail receptions. Yeah, and we also have 2 hours out of 1 week to actually work on the project that we're working on. And we typically deliver something after about 18 to 36 months, having spent about 200 hours on average on a project. The Stackathon does the same, it just does that over 6 months by first meeting monthly, not quarterly, and by removing all the miscellanea. So we just meet in the morning, good morning over coffee. We write specs all day long. We have a short working lunch. We write more specs all day long, and in the evening we just have a daily stand-up, which is not we're not telling jokes to each other, it's comparing notes, making sure that all projects are aligned. And we achieve the same 200 hours within 6 months instead of 2 to 3 years. And hackathons, yeah, well, they just meet sporadically. They have no codes. And again, they write code. With all due respect to code, code is a great way to implement a spec. It's not a way to write a spec. So we launched the initiative through GLF. Those of you who are not familiar with GLF, GLF is a global leaders forum. It's a collaboration of about 24 CEOs of carriers. You have on the left side, you can see a partial list of those carriers, of those 24 carriers. In general, those 24 carriers represent slightly more than 80% of the global traffic. In general, all sorts of traffic. Again, this is CEO level. What they want to see is revenue. They do not want to see technology. They want to see how technology brings revenue, not how technology brings technology. And on the other side, we also had some vendors. But as you can see, these are not the typical vendors that you see on most standard bodies. These are primarily vendors coming from the blockchain environment, software development environment. The ecosystem eventually will be open to all ICT, all CSPs, and all technology providers. So if there is any technology provider who wants to join, we will open the ranks by the end of this month for additional vendors to join the project. Sorry. What do you actually deliver? So GLF was the project lead through a technical committee. We identified 3 core services which are common to all use cases, which would be identity, governance, and assurance. And then we had multiple MVPs and a few coordination efforts that are needed in order to get this thing running. So we have project membership management. How do we actually add members? We don't just accept anyone who wants to join. We want to make sure that if you want to join, you have something to contribute. Either you're an established carrier, or you really have some sort of a software solution to add to the business. Delegate management, again, because we're talking about blockchain and how do we actually delegate and elect a board. And then the various MVPs, the minimum viable products, which are the use cases which we have developed. And we focused first on 3 use cases: wholesale voice settlement, data on demand, this is a DoD, and data and mobile data roaming. 3 MVPs, and of course, an architecture, an overarching architecture that supports all those. Just to give you an idea of the benefits that we found here, on the wholesale voice settlement POC, I don't have a slide because time is running out. So the typical process of wholesale voice settlement takes about 3 months. The calls themselves are done automatically. It's all automated. The settlement takes about 3 months, through which you identify and reconcile disputes and settle. We've been able to reduce that to about 3.5 minutes. So instead of spending 3 months every month in resolving disputes, we just use AI and blockchain, and voila, it happens within 3.5 minutes. Just to show you the level of acceleration. Now, wholesale voice is basically all we can do is accelerate and save resources and then save cost. With data on demand, that's where you can also see new revenue, and that's actually what CEOs want to see. How do we generate new revenue? How do we generate more money from our networks? Okay, so what did we deliver within those 3 months? We've been up 3 months, and we've already delivered basically 4 spec documents, which are basically now final drafts, waiting for the CEOs and the technical entities, technical and commercial people from the 24 carriers to comment on. This is the reference architecture, the data on demand MVP, wholesale voice settlement, and fraud prevention MVP, and mobile roaming settlement MVP. And we have 3 white papers which should be published for Capacity Europe in, I think it's not the week after next. So these are deliverables. Again, we're talking about 3 months, and then we have 3 more months to fix up everything, to fix up any comment that might come from the industry. And then all we have to do is just get those 24 members of GLF to accept those, and we have something that already serves 80% of the industry. Attached on the reference architecture, as I said, this is very commercial orientated. So if you take Ari's presentation, Ari's slide showing how this is done, all that slide boils down to the catalog down there in yellow in the bottom center, because that is actually the network. We focus on the commercials. So in the center, in the gray box, you can see a single entity, a single CSP in a supply chain. There's another CSP on the supply side and another CSP on the, actually, this is the buyer side, this is the seller side from your perspective. And we've broken down the commercial layer into three elements. It's the buyer, the buying entity that buys stuff which you cannot deliver internally from other suppliers in order to complement our own cover, our own footprint. And the selling entity which sells that to the upstream provider or the end customer. Then we have the end-to-end orchestrator, the ESOF, which orchestrates everything, including our own deliverables, which are delivered through the ISOF. So on the bottom left side, you can see the MEF reference architecture. So this is basically takes the MEF reference architecture and takes it a step further. We're ignoring anything Presto and below. Well, you can see if you know Presto. Presto is the middle layer between the two top blue rectangles and the two bottom rectangles, and we were only focusing on the top two rectangles, and we took them and we enhanced them slightly with the new reference architecture, and we've built an entire lifecycle management system, including workflows and data repositories to support them. You wanted to hear about blockchain, so here's where blockchain is. So we figured out we'll need to use two types of ledgers. We'll need to use bilateral ledgers that handle all the bilateral traffic between each pair of carriers. And we need to have an omnilateral ledger, which is sort of a multilateral, but we call it omni because it's everyone is there, which is used for fraud mitigation and for all sorts of other general purpose requirements, such as reputation management, for example, like SLA reputation or payment reputation management. You do need to have a multilateral or an omnilateral ledger for that. And on the first phase, the vendors will develop the whole solution, the full stack, including from the ledger up to the application, including the common functions. And the one rule we said is that a vendor must support at least two different ledger types, because there are multiple ledger types. There's Ethereum, there's Hyperledger, there's Corda, there are plenty of those. We said you must support at least two in order to avoid a situation of a vendor lock-in. In the next phase, we're going to actually create a DLT abstraction layer, which means the application will be completely agnostic to the underlying ledger, and you can just buy the application from any vendor you want, and buy the ledger or compile your own ledger out of open source, any ledger you want, and the DLT abstraction layer will take care of this agnosticity. And obviously, on the right side, you can see the requirement for interoperability with the legacy systems, because we understand that this new approach will need to be running in parallel to the legacy systems for probably years to come. What's next? So for the coming 3 months, we're going to formalize the governance structure. It is still under discussion. We're going to start at least two new MVPs, maybe even 3. We're going to initiate discussion on certification, because if you want to be part of this system and you want to deliver something, whoever buys from you needs to know that you actually deliver what you promised to deliver. We open up the ranks for additional ICTSPs and CSPs and vendors, and we're going to liaise with other SDOs. And if any of you wants to join this initiative, just see me or contact me. Details are there at the bottom. And that ends my presentation, 46 seconds ahead of schedule. So if there is any question, I'll be happy to answer. I still have 39 seconds. You're flabbergasted. Okay, so I give you back 31 seconds of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shahar.